Welcome to Lecture 1 for Art Appreciation. The content in Lecture 1 and 2 will be covered on test number 1. So first of all, with this class, Art Appreciation, I know that often there may not be any art majors. Sometimes there are. But what I want students to know is that you don't have to be an art major to do well in this class or to find joy in this class. When we're younger, a lot of times we all feel creative. Think back when you were in kindergarten. We all loved to color and to dance and sing and do all these different things. But often as we get older, maybe we compare ourselves to other people and we don't feel we're good enough. Maybe other people sadly tell us that we aren't. Maybe our parents tell us that those fun, creative things aren't important, or, life just happens and things kind of get put to the side. But hopefully, with this class, you realize that we all have innate creativity. And the word innate means something that you're born with. Picasso once said that all children are an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once he or she grows up. And I think that that's really true. We're all creative. We just kind of get disconnected as we get older. Sometimes maybe we don't have art offered to us, throughout all of our school years. But it is something offered to you here at the college. And part of the reason that you have to take this class is so that you see how everything is connected together. So I hope that this class helps you kind of reconnect with your inner child. I also want you to see that as we create, we're transformed by what has been created around us. Everything around you has been designed by someone. And if you think about that, those are all creative jobs. So there's a lot of things out there that we don't realize, that someone's designing the labels on our products and someone's designing our clothes, the textiles of the fabrics and objects that we use. Even if you look at toilet paper up close, there's a pattern on it. Someone created that. So really there's creation all around us. Throughout your life, maybe you've been exposed to major works of art, such as the Mona Lisa or Starry Night by Van Gogh, or maybe the Statue of David by Michelangelo. And you've probably been told those are wonderful, but hopefully with this class you'll learn the why. I'm not going to make you memorize a lot of names and titles. That's more of what I would do in an art history class. But I do want you to understand the whys, the how. How do they make it? Why do they make it? Why do we like it? Those sorts of questions. And lastly, I want you to see that there's communication around you all the time. Visual communication. Sadly, we are often so caught up in our own lives and our technology that we're not really paying attention. But there's so much going on around us that if we take the time to see it, we can really, I think, get more out of it, become more curious, and make more connections with the world around us. And one of your first assignments, you're to answer what is art, and I look forward to reading those. In this class, we'll also question: do people need to be creative? I think so. I think part of why we want to be creative is because whatever your religious or spiritual beliefs are, we're part of some type of creation. And I think that just being part of creation, it makes you want to be creative yourself. And but there's other theories that we'll talk about as well. We'll also talk about what is the purpose of art. What are the functions of art? A lot of times people think art's meant to be just pretty pictures or decoration, but it can be so much more. It doesn't fit into one box. People make art to be self expressive, to change the world, to be socially and political, and raise awareness. People make art because it's a spiritual process. There's so many other functions and purposes that you probably don't know of. And if you look at the art world around you, as everything has to be pretty, then you lose a lot of the communication and the information that's out there that art provides. This is just a quote that I like. I think you can take the word art out and put in anything, and but art, just like anything, the more you understand it, the more curious you are about it, the better your understanding will be of that thing. This is a generic definition for a work of art. It's obviously not one that probably works for everything, but I know part of your assignment last week was to come up with a definition of your own. Now, what do artists use to make their art? That's what we call the medium. And so here you can see that there's several different vocabulary words that kind of look like they relate to medium. And you do need to know the difference between those. So whatever artists choose to make their artwork, that's their medium. And the difference between medium, media, and mixed media, it really has to do with whether it's singular or plural. So you can see if an artist chooses, like if you were to say an artist made a sculpture out of marble, you would say the marble is the medium. Okay, so medium is singular, where media is plural. Often you hear people use this incorrectly, and I probably will throughout this class as well. It's used incorrectly in the textbook. I hear people use these words, but this is what they really mean. So media is plural. So if you use more than one thing, you would say the artist uses the media of. And then mixed media, that one's kind of fun. A lot of times in textbooks and on the little labels next to artwork in galleries and museums, you will see that it will say mixed media. And so that can mean that maybe there's too many things that they use to list in that short little citation in your textbook, or maybe next to that work of art in in a museum or gallery. However, there's a third option too. Some people, they just don't like to tell you what they use because maybe that will take away from the magic, or it's like a secret recipe that you don't want them to know. So some people will put mixed media for that reason as well. And then honestly, some people, they just don't remember what all they used. They just know they used a bunch of stuff. Being an artist myself, I put mixed media a lot of times because I do use a bunch of different stuff to make my art, but I also have two dogs that shed a lot. So often there's dog hair on my artwork, and I'll put mixed media just to cover that as well. All right, now art means all sorts of things. And I've had students before ask me, well, do you not like music? Of course I like music and I like movies and all those other things. But this class is a visual art appreciation class. So we're mainly going to be talking about visual art such as painting, drawing, sculpture, photography, digital art, all those types of art. However, dance, music, all those other things, those are types of art as well. And there are appreciation classes for those also. When I was in school, I took theater appreciation and also uh, music appreciation and film appreciation, and I loved all those classes, especially film appreciation because we watched movies and then talked about them. It was pretty fun. I kind of said this earlier. I think people want to be creative because they want to fit in with the creative world around them. Another thing I want you to notice on here is that art is not something made by just these gifted people or these people that are, on some other level. Yeah, I think some people are naturally gifted and talented in certain things, but we'll talk about artists in here that didn't know how to read. We'll talk about artists in here that didn't go to college. And so art is something made by artists, and it's something made for people by people. So I don't want you to ever feel like you don't belong in art areas like galleries or museums. I don't want you to feel like you don't know anything about art. You do. It's just stuff made by people for people. Okay. All right. Now, science and art are also very connected. And in this class, we will be looking at some artwork that, had it been made by a scientist, they would probably call it science. And so those things both involve problem solving and seeking answers. And I think that you'll see connections of those throughout. We'll talk about some artists that dissected the human body before scientists did. We'll talk about scientists that discovered color before artists did. So we'll talk about a lot of these different things and how they kind of feed into each other throughout the class. Now, what are the purposes and functions of art? There's so many. These are a few that I do want you to know for the first test, and I've broken these down into like 6 categories that I think kind of fit everything. Can art fit into more than one of these? Definitely. But for this test and for this class, I want you to realize that like some art kind of fits into one more than others. And some of the examples on the test, you'll be shown works of art that we've talked about in this lecture, and then you will have to choose which purpose or function we discussed with that, okay? So I'm not trying to trick you or anything like that. It should be pretty straightforward. So art can communicate information. What that means is that before, we had the technology we have today, Artwork would tell us what people look like, what they wore, what did the world look like back then. So when I say communicating information, that's like factual information, kind of like history. All right. Day-to-day living, that's artwork that we use for another purpose besides just looking at it. That means that it's something utilitarian, like our clothing, like our handbags, like our shoes, like our homes that we live in, like our cars. Those are all things designed by people, but and they look nice, but they also serve another purpose. So that's what day-to-day living is: things designed by people that we use for another function. Spirituality, that's something that we probably don't see as much in this world, in the Western world. However, it is a process that where people in making the artwork, it's a spiritual process, a meditation, a prayer, etc. And you will see some examples of that I'll show you. And I think if you talk to some artists, I know sometimes when I work late at night, I'll look at the clock and 4 or 5 hours have gone by and it seems like 5 minutes. And I'll kind of become conscious and look at my work and I'm like, whoa, I just did that. So sometimes I think it can even feel spiritual for the artists themselves, if even if they're making it more because they just want to. I don't know. Some people think that there's muses and things that inspire us. So we'll look at some examples of that. Personal expression, you're probably all familiar with that. That's where artists they make something because they feel compelled to. Maybe it's self-expression, maybe it's a self-portrait showing us what they look like and how they feel. There's a lot of it's kind of like therapy, and I know a lot of artists we feel like that's one of the reasons that we like to make art. Social and political awareness. Our art sometimes is our voice. Sometimes artwork can break boundaries that words cannot. And so I think that definitely artists like to use their artwork sometimes for a social or political platform to kind of advocate for those things that we believe in or raise awareness about those things that we think people need to know about. And then lastly, visual delight. Sometimes we just like to make pretty pictures, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that that means that maybe there's not a lot of content or meaning in the work, that it's just something nice to look at. All right, so for communicating information, we kind of talked about that. So these are some examples. This is a piece called The Tree of Jesse, and it is a stained glass window. And some of you may be thinking, well, isn't this spiritual? No, it's religious, but not, the process of it was not a spiritual process. However, before we had readily available books and most people knew how to read during the Middle Ages. We didn't, and so how did we teach people stories? Well, we used pictures, just like we do with kids today. And so, in throughout the churches and cathedrals, there are images not only painted on the walls but even in the windows. And so, for instance, this piece here, if you notice the little registers or sections of the window, there's a different person in each one of these. And this is actually explaining the genealogy of Jesus and of the Christian faith. So you can see this king laying down, it looks kind of like on a chase lounge. And then in each register, these are another one of Jesus's ancestors. And then you get up here to towards the top, you see Mary, and then the larger register at the top, you see Jesus. He's bigger than everybody else, and we call that a hierarchy of scale because usually in artwork, the most important person is always larger than everyone else, or at least that's the way it used to be. And then right above Jesus's head, there is a little dove, which is symbolic of the Holy Trinity and the Holy Spirit. So you can see this explains that. And so people would have been hearing those stories in the church and then also seeing the imagery that helped them understand it. This is a painting of Louis XIV by Ragat, and this was before photography. So communicating information, well, we wouldn't know what this person looked like, this king looked like, if it wasn't for artists depicting it. Now notice this almost looks like a photo because it's so realistic, and that's partly because shortly before this time period, a couple of hundred years before it, artists discovered oil paint. And so you see that they've mastered it to a point that it looks like a photograph before the photograph even existed. So that definitely tells us what he looks like. But if you look closer, the artist painted it so well, you can almost imagine what the textiles are, like the little fur lining inside of the cloak. You can see the Oriental style rug. It shows that he was world traveled, maybe, and really knowledgeable about the world with the different things. The column in the background showing that he understood like antiquities and had been exposed to that. Notice it also, there's some subliminal messages as well. We see that he's got his crown off to the side, and also his sword is showing, but he doesn't have it drawn. And so this is meant to kind of be like propaganda, like we see today with our world leaders. Here he's saying like he doesn't wear his power, but it's there if he needs to. And he doesn't. Maybe he's not a violent king, but he's got his sword there in case he needs to fight for his people or his country. And so I think that that's kind of interesting how, some rulers may kind of try to come across as more powerful, but here he's kind of saying, I'm ready, but I don't need to pull it out just yet. It also is kind of weird that you can see his tights and heels. And believe it or not, that's what people wore back then. So again, this is telling us what their fashion was of the time. But also, this painting was made for his grandson, and he was 63 when it was made. It's kind of weird, you imagine, to get a painting of your 63-year-old grandfather wearing tights and heels and a wig. However, during this time, it would have been a little bit different because that was the customs. And this would have been an honor if you were part of the royal family to have a painting like this to put in your home. But supposedly he was also proud of his legs because he liked to play tennis and other sports, and he was very physically fit for his age. So it's kind of funny. Now, art for day to day living, again, that's utilitarian artwork, and it's things that we use. So, really, since the beginning of time, we've decorated things that we use. We've taken pride in making things that are personal, that are interesting, that reflect part of who we are. And so here you can see this is a parfleche, which is a Native American handbag, kind of similar to a backpack. And you can see whoever made this or bought it or whatever, they took the time to decorate it. And if you study American history, you know that a lot of the Native Americans didn't have the easiest lives, but they still took the time and pride to decorate their handmade belongings, just like we, like to pick out those things today. Interior design is also a type of utilitarian art. We like to decorate our homes and living spaces to fit our needs, but also to look a certain way. The same thing with fashion. Most of us try to, choose clothing that we like, and even if we can't afford, couture fashion or whatever, we still like to try to get things that fit our personality, that fit our different body types, and that looks good. But they're all meant to be used. Even things like our plates, those are made by people, designed by people. Sometimes people do have these things up as decoration, but think about what is their true function. And that usually is to eat off them, to do something with them. Often my mom puts stuff like this up as decoration and she won't let us use it. But I know that the primary purpose of it is to, eat off of it or use it in some way. Now, art for the spirit, again, that is where it's a spiritual process while making the artwork. And we don't see that as much maybe in the Western world, but it is popular in other places, and it was popular more maybe in previous time periods. You've all probably heard of Stonehenge or seen pictures of Stonehenge before. This is in England, and this dates back to prehistoric times. And we really don't know why or how it was made. But the reason I threw it into this category is because it contradicts what historians uh, think and scientists think about people from these time periods. They've always said that they had no written language, no spoken language, and that they didn't have any sense of government or religion, and that their lifespans were very short because of the climate changes and things happening back there, but also just because they were very primitive people. And so, why this is something that I believe is something that maybe it was a spiritual process, or something was driving them to do this, is these stones had to come from miles away. And there's no way that they could have gotten there without people understanding and communicating with each other. But also, it would have taken multiple lifetimes to build this. And so it shows that the people believed in something, or they were motivated by something to continue to build this long after the people who had started it had passed away. We still don't know all the answers. There's other theories about aliens and spaceships, and this lines up with the stars and astrology and all these different things. There's a lot of theories about this piece, as well as with some of the ancient uh, buildings and things that we'll talk about. But this one is, I think, definitely a lot of people believe maybe it was some type of a spiritual healing place, or it had to do with some type of rituals with the stars and the moon and sun and all these different things. Recently, they have found some dwelling places underground close by to this, so maybe we'll know more answers in the near future. Now, this is a wonderful example of the spiritual process and or purpose of art. This is a sand mandala made by monks from Tibet, and I've witnessed one of these being made before. There's a place in downtown Dallas called the Crow Collection of Asian Art, and once a year they will allow people to come while monks are there from Tibet, and it takes a week for them to make one of these. It's all made by loose sand that is colored, and I believe the sand is made from ground marble, and they have these little tools that they rub the tool and the sand trickles out, and this image is meant to be this abstract kind of heavenly palace that they've memorized since childhood, and they don't have to communicate with each other. While what they're doing is they're praying and meditating the whole time that they're working on this big piece of art. And I know from here you're looking at it overhead, but this is on a flat table that's probably about 5 foot square, and they walk around it for literally a week, taking shifts. And the whole time that they're working on it, they're praying and meditating for healing of the world. And so all the colors and designs you see, that's all loose sand. So up close, it kind of looks like icing on a cake, but it's just loose powder. And they're not saying, "Hey man, you do the green, you do the blue, I'll do the yellow." They just know what to do. And as they take breaks and rest, the other people come in and work on it constantly for an entire week. And you would think after you worked on something this elaborate for a week, you would save it and preserve it in some way. But they actually sweep it all away, and then they hand out the sand that's been blessed to people, and then the majority of it they dump into a body of water, hoping that it carries healing power to the world. And so, like I said, usually about once a year, you can go watch one of these being made. You just have to be on really good behavior while you're watching it, and don't sneeze because it will blow everywhere. I'm just kidding. But anyway, it's a really cool process, and there's a little video here, a link that you can click on if you want to see one of them being made. So feel free to watch that. I think you'll be inspired. So this is just some other dance rituals and things that would fall into this category as well. Now, personal expression, a lot of artists, that's one of the main driving forces of why they make art, why they feel called to make art, is to share what they're going through. And some people, they think, well, why would you do that? How would that other people relate to it? Well, um, we all feel emotions, and we all feel different ways. And so emotions are universal. And so sometimes when you're the most self-revealing, more people will actually connect to it. And artists have always made self-portraits and made artwork about themselves, what they're going through in their life, what their identity is. And to me, that's one of the most inspiring types of art, because I think that's kind of why we're here, is just to share our experiences and stories and help each other out. Often artists do self-portraits, and I know today people talk about Frida Kahlo is another artist that most of her work was all about self-expression. And if you've want to see a great movie about her, there's a movie called Frida with Selma Hayek in it, and it's about her life. It's a really good movie,
and I think it came out in like 2000. But Selma Hayek was very passionate about wanting to play Frida Kahlo and get Frida's story in a big Hollywood movie in the United States because, um, like Selma Hayek, who's half Mexican and half Lebanese, Selma Hayek was also, I'm sorry, Frida Kahlo was also half Mexican and half European, Middle Eastern. Her father was an immigrant who fled Europe and the Middle East to come to Mexico during the World Wars, and and then he changed his name and he was a photographer there, where he met her mother and they had a family, and so Frida grew up hearing multiple languages, learning multiple cultures. She had a very promising future, but her life was filled with challenges. At a very young age, she contracted polio and almost died as a child, and it disfigured polio. There's a vaccination for it now, but when people used to get it, it made one of their sides of their bodies not develop as faster. So she always had a limp, and one of her legs was smaller. And at one point in her life, her foot actually had to be amputated because of the problems that it caused her. But she still was very active, wanted to do more. And then when she was a teenager, she was taking public transportation, and the transportation car that she was on collided with another vehicle, and she broke almost every bone in her body, and one of the handrails actually stabbed through her abdomen, piercing her uterus and breaking her spine and coming out her back, like it literally impaled her. And they were really shocked that she survived, because some people did die in the accident, and she was bedridden in a full body cast for years of her life. So you can imagine being this promising, smart teenager, and then all of a sudden you're in a full body cast for literally years. She was told she would never walk again, but while she was in bed, guess what she wanted to do? Paint. She said painting actually alleviated her pain more than the medicine. And to me, these stories are so inspiring because when I'm sick, I barely can change the channel on the TV. But to know that someone wanted to paint while they were in pain, it's just very inspiring, and it makes you look at their work even more to see like what was going on. So these two pieces of her, she eventually did teach herself to walk, by the way, and she studied under an artist named Diego Rivera, who helped her get better at painting, but also get her work out there more. And he ended up being a world famous artist, and they eventually got married, but their relationship was pretty rocky as well. But in these images here, the one on the left is called Broken Column, and we can see that her spine has been replaced by a column that's been put back together. We see her painted topless. However, it's not to be sexualized. It's meant to show that she's a woman, but she's broken. Like her body doesn't function like the idea of a woman's body should. We can see nails and pins all over her body, representing, I imagine, all of the pain and nerve damage throughout her body, the ghost pains that she probably feels. We also see that she's crying, but not tears of weakness, but tears of strength and endurance. One of the things I love about her work is that everything is symbolic. So even the background, which a lot of people neglect in their artwork, we see behind her is this desert, this barren desert, and that's symbolic of her womb. Because that accident impaled her uterus, she was never able to have children, and she did have a few miscarriages in her life, and it caused her a lot of pain because she really did want children of her own. And so the desert's meant to symbolize her being barren as well. The image on the right is called Dos Fridas, or Two Fridas. And this painting traveled to the Dallas Museum of Art just a couple of years ago, and I got to see it in person. It was really exciting to see. And this one it's her painted twice, and you can see that she's holding her own hand, and in her right hand in the white dress, she's holding a clamp that's clamping a blood vein or artery, keeping her from bleeding to death. And in the left hand, she's holding a locket. And if you could look really close, this image isn't the best, but if you can see it up close, it's actually a picture of her husband. And this painting is showing how she has to feel like she has to be two different people for her husband. And so we could see her in her traditional Mexican attire, and her heart looks healthy. And that's who she liked to be. She didn't care about world fame or acknowledgement. She just wanted to be able to do what she loves and support her family because they supported her when she was sick. But her husband wanted world fame, and so you can see that that bloodline and heart connects to the Frida on the right side, and she's wearing this European American wedding dress, and we can see her heart is exposed and it looks damaged and sick. And then she's trying not to bleed to death, and the blood drops are becoming the rose patterns on the dress. Pretty dark. And then in the background, there's a stormy cloud. Well, her and her husband fought a lot, and he had multiple affairs on her, even once with one of her sisters. And so their relationship was very rocky and stormy, and they even got divorced and then remarried later in their life. But we've all probably maybe not had that maybe dramatic of a life, but we've all probably felt like in some way we've had to be someone else for someone in our lives. Maybe someone you're in a relationship. Maybe you feel like you have to be someone for your parents, but different for your friends. And so I think that's a challenge that we all face, and to some extent. Now, our work for social and political awareness, like I said, this can be art that's meant to raise awareness, to be propaganda. It can be all sorts of things. And I think in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of this with a lot of the controversy around the elections that we've had and the different events going on around the world. So, what makes it social or political? Well, sometimes it's just the symbolism used. This artist, Jasper Johns, he loved the American flag as like a symbol. And in the 1950s, he made a lot of American flag paintings just because he liked it. So it becomes political just because of the symbolism. This artist liked to capture great moments in history. Like this is the moment of Allies Day, celebrating all of the allies of different countries. This artist, Barbara Kruger, she likes to raise awareness. She says about the things that people don't talk about that are still happening. A lot of her artwork is only black, red, and white because she wants it to read as like a newspaper headline. But it usually is about consumerism, racism, sexism, all these different things that happen in the world that she feels like that people ignore, and she tries to bring more awareness about it. And then the last category of art is visual delight, and like I said, that's just things that are meant to be pretty, maybe a diversion from our everyday hectic lives. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, as long as people realize that not all art is a pretty picture, nor should it have to be. So this is the category my mom likes the most, and maybe a lot of moms do. But as long as you know the difference, I think that you realize that art can be very complex. So things like this, just decorative things. I know a lot of people really used to like Thomas Kincaid's work. He was a landscape painter that just made these really beautiful landscape paintings with a lot of light in them. I think he was known as the painter of light. And while he was alive, there were actually a lot of shopping malls had galleries with his artwork or reproductions of his artwork for sale in them. So there's not like a strong message or meaning. It's just meant to be, really nice, pretty stuff. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is that, like I said, art serves a lot of different purposes, just like people do. And so I think that if we think about that it will help us not be quick to judge others, but also not to be so quick to judge art, and realize that even though we don't like it visually, there may be something we can learn from it, or that we can take, from it as well. Because there's a lot of art I love, but I wouldn't necessarily decorate my house with it. And so, anyway, I hope that that helps you understand some of those purposes and functions. And the main thing you need to know out of this lecture is the vocabulary, and to be able to identify artwork that fits into those different categories of purposes and functions.